Hello. Okay. Good afternoon. So welcome to Politics and Prose bookstore. My name's Rich. I'm a bookseller here. Unfortunately, John Balaban will not be here today. He really regrets not being able to be here, but he was surprised by a hospitalization last week. He is getting better, but he's delighted his friends who were originally moderating the event, Laurie Burgess and Spencer Goyette, they're students of his um, from uh, a bit ago. They're going to read from his new book of poems, essays, and translations. So we're happy we can still go ahead and hear some of John's work. So the event's going to be a little different today in regards to like a Q&A section. If you do have any questions regarding John, you can be happy to, we'll be happy to hear those. And yeah, Laurie and Spencer can go ahead and answer those best they can. So if you've not turned off your cell phone, if we can silence that, that'd be great. And if you've not already purchased the book, you can do so that behind the register. And then once the event is complete, if you can just fold the chairs up and lean them against something sturdy, that would just help the staff out. So thank you. So yeah, John's book, Passing Through a Gate, is an essential collection of his work, the best of his prize-winning poems since 1970, collected in one place. Threaded through with essays that link poetry to Balaban's extensive travels, whether hitchhiking through the United States or wandering the countryside of Vietnam during wartime to record and translate folk poetry. So Laurie Burgess retired in 2023 as the co-chair of the Smithsonian's Department of Anthropology at the National Museum of Natural History. Among other duties, she oversaw the international reparation of human remains for the museum. Her background is in historical archaeology. She specialized in the material culture of historic period of North America. Spencer Goyette has been working in museum and natural history collections for the past decade. Most recently, he was a curatorial assistant at the Beatty Biodiversity Museum in Vancouver, British Columbia. Prior to moving to Canada, he worked as a museum contractor in the departments of botany and invertebrate zoology at the National Museum of Natural History. His research interests have been most recently been focused on ecology and the evolution of lichens and other symbioses. So if we just have a little warm welcome for Laurie Burgess and Spencer Goyette.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. We're as sorry as you are that John isn't here today. And I think John is probably the most sorry of all not to be joining us. Oh. Okay, how's that? Better? Okay. And I think John is the most sorry of all that he's not here, being caught off guard by the hospitalization last week. So Spencer and I will do the best that we can. As someone who spent her career in a museum, I understand the power of the authentic and that we will be pale shadows here, but we will do our best. So we're honoring the order of the poems that John selected to be read. He's also included 2 prose pieces with this, and we're starting off with one of the prose pieces, which is Lighting Out for the Territories. It's a lovely long piece, and John's poem, After Our War, is embedded in the middle of it. As you know, in the book, there are a number of essays on poetry in a writer's life, and I think John has been one of our most important voices in the 20th, 21st century for this. And this essay in particular, I think, really sets out the framework for a lot of his body of work. So it's fairly long, but it's a good structure. Lighting Out for the Territories, which begins with the epigram from Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road, afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road. In 1962, just out of high school, I drove from Philadelphia to the Seattle World's Fair with a classmate, Hans Peter Jr., in his crappy car. Hans had also just graduated, and neither of us had any prospects or plans. Neither of us had been anywhere on our own. We told our families we could get jobs at the fair. They seemed willing to believe us and waved us goodbye. Be careful. A day or so later, somewhere in the Midwest, the car's battery started dying. Not wanting to spend our small bankroll on a new one, we kept on by leaving the engine running at gas stops, parking on hilltops at night so that when we woke to daybreak traffic, I could push start us with blonde and lanky Hans at the wheel, working the clutch and ignition as the car rolled downhill until the engine coughed, caught, varoomed with a clatter, and we were on our way again, heading to the mythical west of our 60s generation. It was all new. We were on our own. Dharma bums, on the road, free. When we got to Seattle with its new Space Needle, we discovered there were no jobs for two kids with no real work experience, and it rained all the time. All the time. It got old fast. Now we had even less money and were sleeping in the car in our wet clothes. I decided to go home. So I set off hitchhiking, abandoning Hans in Seattle, thumbing rides all the way back, getting picked up by some sweet old folks who wanted to buy me a meal, by a preacher who said I could sleep in his church and offered me a tractor driving job on a local farm, by a guy with heavily chained dogfighting dogs lying in the back seat in their poop, by three roughnecks about my own age, one with two black eyes, who were taking their driver back to Ames, Iowa to surrender to the police, and once by a beautiful girl in a Volvo whom I advised not to pick up strangers. On that long trip back across the continent, I was seeing America with nothing intervening, not through its representations in magazines or movies or TV, but what was really out there along its vast highways. As I would later assess it, I had pulled off the shroud of adolescent. I had pulled the shroud off my adolescent head and was seeing the Hopkins-esque inscape in the landscape, the quote, much unseen of place and population that Whitman saw more than 100 years before, writing, "Afoot and lighthearted, I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me, the long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. You road I enter upon and look around. I believe you are not all that is here. I believe that much unseen is also here." The next time I hitchhiked across the US was a decade later, after 2 trips to Vietnam. The US had changed. I had changed. The much unseen had also changed. After our war. After our war, the dismembered bits, all those pierced eyes, ear slivers, jaw splinters, gouged lips, odd tibias, skin flaps, and toes, came squinting, wobbling, jabbering back. The genitals, of course, were the most bizarre, inching along the road like glowworms and slugs. The living wanted them back, but good as new. The dead, of course, had no use for them. And the ghosts, the tens of thousands of abandoned souls who had appeared like swamp fog in city streets, on the evening altars and on door sills of cratered homes, also had no use for the scraps and bits because, in their opinion, they looked good without them. Since all things naturally return to their source, these snags and tatters arrived with immigrant uncertainty in the United States. It was almost home. So now one can sometimes see a friend or a famous man talking with an extra pair of lips glued and yammering on his cheek. And this is why handshakes are often unpleasant, why it is better sometimes to not look another in the eye, why at your daughter's breast thickens a hard keloidal scar. After the war, with such Cheshire cats grinning in our trees, will the ancient tales still tell us new truths? Will the myriad world surrender new metaphor? After our war, how will love speak? By then, I had started teaching at Penn State, and my abiding thoughts were a turmoil from far away in Saigon, where my best friends remained. Steve Earhart, who had become a reporter after working for RMK BRJ Construction, where he leaked files on their infamous Tiger Cage prison. And Crystal Steinbeck, Steve's former wife, who worked at Dispatch News, who helped uncover evidence of the My Lai massacre, and who had just had a baby with John Steinbeck IV, son of the writer. All of them living together in and out of the old Graham Greene apartment on 2 Doe Street, where sometimes Greene's opium pipe master still climbed the creaky stairs with his odoriferous valise to service his new American customers chasing the dragon. Reporters like Sean Flynn and Dana Stone, now gone missing in Cambodia. That spring, with my friends in the thick of it, the war bumbled on, and I broke my foot stealing home in a faculty grad student baseball game, which put me in a cast and on crutches. My spring semester classes had kept me busy and focused, but they were almost over. About the time I had the cast cut off, I learned that Steve Earhart had returned to San Francisco to be operated on for stomach cancer. I resolved to go see him, perhaps to say goodbye. Perhaps it was friendship, perhaps it was just the pull of Whitman's open road. But I told my patient, newlywed wife that I needed to see America again to figure out whether I could even live in it. So in 1974, when the spring semester ended, she dropped me off on Route 80 with an orange backpack, my crutches, and a CB walkie-talkie. Hiking with a walkie-talkie, I would like to note, was my cultural innovation. I knew that citizens band radios were being used by truckers to talk to each other on the highways, so I figured I could use a handheld walkie-talkie to ask them for rides. No standing by the roadside holding up a barely readable sign to whatever sped by. With my walkie-talkie, I could announce myself for miles down the highways. Hi, I am standing here at mile marker 445. I have a CB, and I'm heading to San Francisco. The second poem on John's list is Christmas Eve at Washington's Crossing. Out on the freezing Delaware, ice sheets bob the surface, breaking against granite pilings of the Colonial River Inn swept by winter's storm. Gusts of snow blow off a sandbar and sink in plunging currents, where a line of ducks paddles hard against the blizzard. As cornfields on the Jersey banks are whisked into bits of stalk and broken sheaves, spinning in the squalls. This is where, one such Christmas night, the tall, courtly general with bad teeth risked his neck and his rebels to cross the storming river and rout the Hessians. What made them think they could succeed? Farmers mostly, leaving homesteads to load cannon into Durham boats, to row into the snowstorm, then march all night to Trenton, saving the Republic for Valley Forge and victory at Yorktown. Before crossing, legend says, they assembled in the snow to hear Paine's new essay about summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. What words could call us all together now? On what riverbank? For what common good would we abandon all? The next poem is one of John's translations from Spring Essence. And as we all know, he's an extraordinary poet and a superbly fine translator. John actually wanted me to check to see if there's anyone in the audience who speaks Vietnamese, who would be willing to read the poem in Vietnamese. Then I'll continue with the English. It's also here in Nom, which is the ancient literary script of Vietnam that was in use for 1,000 years until it died out in the 1800s. John helped start a foundation in Vietnam for the preservation of Nom. These are the poems of Ho Xuan Huang, who was a poet born in the late 18th century and a woman, which is significant for the time. And I think we're all familiar with John's book, Spring Essence. So this poem is titled Spring Watching Pavilion. A gentle spring evening arrives, airily, unclouded by worldly dust. 3 times the bell tolls echo like a wave. We see heaven upside down in sad puddles. Love's vast sea cannot be emptied, and springs of grace flow easily everywhere. Where is Nirvana? Nirvana is here 9 times out of 10. The fourth poem actually opens this volume and goes back to an earlier time in John's writing. Walking down into Sequoia Canyon. Has the epigram, or it has an epigram from the Aeneid. Then, truly unhappy, terrified by fate, wearied by the empty sky, Dido prayed for death. Everything about us, for better or worse, we make ourselves, with marvelous exceptions. The snow peaks rinsed in rose light at dusk on the Sangre de Cristo range, the bleached, broken jaw of a mule deer, its teeth scattered among cactus wreaths beside the trail, down from the mesa, where the river stammers against volcanic rocks and pools, where spooked trout skim through aspen leaves, tumbling in clear water. This river cut through centuries of rock to our time when all assertions are suspect, to our century of assurances gone mute, where we, deserted like Dido before her pyre, or Raleigh pacing the lie in the tower, look up to see, quote, a wearying empty sky, and gag on words like sour meat. Stewed in the stomach of a haggis sheep. So pity the poet whose work is words, reduced to blather or fiery silences, as the gods who breathe the word expire. This vast rubble offers its one blessing. Everything it says it's true. Parched mesa, willow water, fox skull, circling raven, tarantula, deer turd singing wren. One wanders down past living metaphors. Where life is threatened, few lies are told. Under a blank sky, one clambers down collapsed ledges clustered with paintbrush. Small, alone, no better than a bug. Accepting these terms, one takes a place offered all along by the ribbon stream, calling up from the bouldered canyon floor. To stand here at dusk and stare at spilling water, near a wren jigging on a jagged slab, as the river leaps by through lunar wastes, where trout, coyote, magpie, cougar prosper in the innocence which humans find in love, bringing us the water's benediction. The streams we play in flow sweet water. Anyone might drink here and be refreshed. All day, sunlight strikes the river clear. At dusk, the current ripples with a moon. Love, like water, makes the canyons bloom. And for the final poem in my section of this reading today, I'm going to read Three Men Dancing on a River Shore. This is a poem that John dedicated to two of his dear friends, Tim Buckley, who was a prominent Buddhist here in the US, who died about a decade ago, and Tracy McCallum, who was director of the Harwood Foundation and Library in Taos, New Mexico. John had been close to both of them, and especially to Tracy since the 70s. Tracy died unexpectedly just a year ago now, catching us both off guard. I had known Tracy since the 80s when I had lived in Taos as well. So three men dancing on a river shore with an epigram, Qing Dynasty serving platter, blue and white porcelain. In the background, you can see the city they left behind when they crossed the river to dance on this shore. Three gentlemen in Mandarin robes and scruffy beards, now jigging on the sand under pines and willows, accompanied by musicians on trumpet, flute, and drum, and one plying a squeeze box of some kind, for these scholars waving their hands above their heads, kicking up sand and celebrating friendship, their Dharma bridge for getting to the other side, however briefly. Three men dancing, not drunk, just immensely amused, knowing that soon enough they would be only the wind shushing its sad music along an empty shore. Thank you. And now we will turn the rest of the reading over to Spencer Goyette.
Hello, thank you. Can everybody, is it loud? Okay. I just have 4 poems to read. I didn't plan much to say between each piece, but thank you all for staying here and for celebrating such a wonderful poet and friend. So, thank you. The first poem I'll read is Anna Akhmatova, spends the night on Miami Beach. Well, her book, anyway. The Kunitz volume left lying on a bench, the pages a bit puffy by morning, flushed with dew, riffled by sea breeze, scratchy with sand. The paperback with the 1930s photo showing her in spangled caftan, its back cover calling her star of the St. Petersburg Circle of Pasternak, Mandelstam, and Bloch, surviving the revolution and 2 world wars. So she'd been through worse. The months outside Lefortovo prison, waiting for a son who was already dead, watching women stagger and reel with news of executions. One mother asking, "Can you write about this?" Akhmatova thought, then answered, "Yes." If music lured her off the sandy beach to the clubs where men were kissing, that wouldn't have bothered her much, nor the vamps sashaying in leather. Decadence amid Art Deco fit nicely with her black dress, chopped hair, Chanel cap. What killed her was the talk, the empty eyes, which made her long for the one person in 10,000 who could say her name in Russian, who could take her home, giving her a place between Auden and Apollinaire to whom she could describe her night's excursion amid the loud hilarities, the trivial hungers at the end of the American century. My apologies for the small pieces of paper. The next poem is Passing Through Albuquerque. Passing Through Albuquerque. At dusk, by the irrigation ditch, gurgling past backyards near the highway, locusts raise a maze of calls in cottonwoods. A Spanish girl in a white party dress strolls the levee by the muddy water where her small sister plunks in stones. Beyond a low adobe wall in a wrecked car, men are pitching horseshoes in a dusty lot. Someone shouts as he clangs in a ringer. Big winds buffet in ahead of a storm, rocking the immense trees and whipping up clouds of dust, wild leaves, and cotton wool. In the moment when the locusts pause and the girl presses her up-fluttering dress to her bony knees, you can hear a banjo, guitar, and fiddle playing the Mississippi Sawyer inside a shack. Moments like that, you can love this country. This next poem is called The Gift of Morning Water, and it's a prose piece. So it's fantastic. Every time I practice this, actually, I kind of got a little bit weepy, so I'll try not to be too emotional during this reading, but my apologies if it happens. The Gift of Morning Water. After the long night, with a cold wind riffling the scrim of the teepee, lit like a lantern on the deserted prairie, a night of chills in the small of the back, aches in crossed legs. After all the hours of chanting from Indians and Anglos, after their drumming on the iron kettle stretched with hide, its water-filled belly bellowing when tipped, after the prayers sung for forgiveness, for guidance from the grandfather peyote on the crescent of sand, after chewing bitter buttons, swallowing dry powder, after the drumming and the singing and the sweet sage thrown on the dazzling fire, as the embers died and dawn finally rinsed the top of the tent, the road chief, an elderly Tiwa, who throughout the night had asked him to show us the right road, said, "A woman is coming with morning water. Listen to her. She is your mother." An old Pueblo woman crawled through the tent flap, short of breath, and shoving before her on the teepee sand a steel bucket, water sloshing, ladle clanking, and I turned with exhaustion, with disappointment. For all night long, I had sat eating the medicine, going out only once under the huge roaring stars to take a leak and return, and nothing really had happened. And then she spoke. With puffy, tired lips, said, "You have done a good thing here tonight. Drink this water and be refreshed." And every syllable that came from her was perfectly the voice of my own mother, dead for many years. Stunned and now weeping, I sat as the bucket came around to me, wept hard at hearing her voice again. I have a friend in Vermont who for a full week after his father's death kept calling the family answering machine just to hold a bit longer to his father's voice. And here I was made a gift I hadn't known how much I wanted, the voice that called my name the first morning of my life. This is the final poem. It's called Kate and Gary's Bar, Red River, New Mexico. Just over the mountains from Eagle Nest, where the glacial maw ground out a valley and oceans of gold aspens surge around steep boulder fields and islands of evergreens and the collapsing ghost town where hippies hole up, you come to Red River. A string of bars and curio shops, all pine planks and logs. The river rattles rocks behind the town. Further on toward Cuesta, where the Rockies open to volcanic plains, a huge gray slag heap slides towards the river from the molybdenum mine. The town makes no claim on eternity, a mere moment in the granite gorge shadowed by whistling crags and forests beside a river carving out canyons, eating its way to the sea. Kate's son drove me into town, picked me up off the road from Cuesta, so I had her roast beef special and a beer. She pulled a chair from the edge of the dance floor, watched my Adam's apple bob with beer, and studied my backpack and sleeping bag leaning by the door. "What do you do anyway?" she asked. "You're no drifter." "I write poetry," I said. She smiled and pushed her bifocals back up her nose. "I knew you did something like that." "Grace," she called behind the bar to the long-legged girl setting up drinks. "Bring our friend another Coors." Thank you again for coming out and supporting our friend and poet, John Balaban. We're happy to take any questions, like the staff here said, and I think we can answer to the best of our abilities. Also, we'd like to thank the staff for being so accommodating during this time. I know it was probably very stressful, all things considered, and I'm just glad that Laurie and I can be here with all of you today to celebrate such a wonderful human being, teacher, friend, and poet and translator. So, thank you. Yeah.
Sure, I could do that.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, just from the readings you guys had, you have the poet who wrote Spring Essence is something he obviously, loved because he did a translation of her. He also mentions like Dharma bums like Jack Kerouac, and finally, Song of the Open Road, Walt Whitman. You guys were both students of his and such. What are some of the other poets, either Vietnamese or such, that were influences on him? Did he ever bring them up in class and such? I'll take my question.
Okay. He did. I mean, John was John Barth's student, and I think Barth was an enormous influence on John Balaban. And as we know, we lost Barth recently, or just this spring we lost Barth. And he was also, I think, very much a student in a way of W.S. Merwin. I think he had a strong relationship with Merwin. And he came out of Harvard, and he came out of Harvard at a time when I think you learned poetry during this time period, but there were also, I think, still some classical references coming in. I mean, we see the Aeneid, we see other references coming down. But John, I think, read extremely widely. When I was a student in the 80s, we had one major poet after another come through our classes, and it was such a gift. We had Maxine Kuhn, Seamus Haney, Gary Snyder. I mean, it was just such a wonderful way to learn with these masters among us. What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. He was kind of a magnet for literary forces across the continent and the globe. So we also had like W.S. Merwin came to visit when I was his student in like the early 2010s, and Natalie Diaz, another very famous poet, came through and gave a reading. Yusuf Kumanyaka, Lee Young Lee. It was quite a tour de force, which was really impactful for me as a young person to be able to interact with these people and hear their poems in person, etc. But yeah, I think it was kind of there's so many kind of authors that I think he introduced me to. But the first poem I think he read for one of our classes was by William Carlos Williams, called Graph, and that was kind of what hooked me initially, and was absolutely spectacular. But I think that was a really good question.
No, I think that's true. I think also, to veer away from authors, I think, as we know, Vietnam shaped his work probably the most powerfully. And then his journeys hitchhiking across the U.S., I think that was, for that time period, structured a lot of his work. And then, of course, persisting with Vietnamese translation, I think we just see that thread running through all of his work.
What is the illness?
We aren't entirely sure. He's not feeling well right now. He found himself in the hospital unexpectedly. I know he wanted to be here in a terrible way. So we'll be talking to him after this just to see, but we're actually not sure. And I'm telling you genuinely, we don't know. Often we do, but we don't at this point. But I know he really wanted to be here. We were going to have a reunion. We live out in the Shenandoah Valley. We were going to have a reunion at the farmhouse. The three of us hadn't been together in 10 years since there was a reception for Barth.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But we're heartbroken. But I think we will see John here reading again to us. I think I can say that with confidence.
Any other questions or comments? Thoughts? No? Okay. Well, thank you again.
And thank you for coming and for persisting with us who are not John. We're very grateful. Thank you.